Today we're going to start Unit 1. And so these are our first notes for this unit. So with this unit, we will have 4 different sets of notes. So we'll cover 4 different topics. And so remember, this is the TCI pilot. Okay, so just like be patient with me because I'm using textbook stuff and didn't really customize it too much. Okay, so these notes are the origins and evolution of government. So for our purposes, this is Unit 1, Lesson 1, or Unit 1, Notes 1. But in the book, if you're looking to find it in the textbook, it is Unit 1, Lesson 2. So technically it's like 2.1, and in the textbook, you can find it on pages 20 through 24. And so for this unit, we're going to be comparing forms of government, and kind of the big question that we'll be asking is how should political and economic power be distributed in a society? You know, who should be in charge? How much power should they have? Should it be shared? Kind of all of these big questions. And so these are the different objectives for this whole unit. So for this first unit, we're going to be analyzing the origins and development of governments over time and classify various political systems. So we'll be looking kind of like a quick history lesson about how different types of governments developed over time based on the changing needs of society, the introductions of democratic ideas, authoritarian regimes, and kind of just like how those governments have changed throughout time. Okay, so remember, we're starting on page 20. So the origins and evolution of government. All societies, large and small, develop some form of government. The invention of farming triggered the evolution of a more formal system of governments. Over time, some farming villages grew into cities and city-states. Gradual power in many city-states became concentrated in the hands of a single ruler. The strongest of these rulers conquered neighboring city-states to create the world's first empires. And so this is trying to go back like all the way to the start of man, that, you know, people organize themselves in maybe like hunter-gatherer groups. And even though it wasn't necessarily a sophisticated society, they would still have some form of a leader, someone to direct them, provide some kind of organization to their society. But a lot of these societies were kind of nomadic and would move around. And so the invention of farming, where you're planting crops and you're waiting for those crops to grow, actually, you know, made people become more stationary, and we began to see more formal systems of government, like traditional, like who's going to be the leader? Is it going to be passed down from father to son? Is it going to be just the elders within the society? And so this is how we start to see kind of progression um, with the development of government. And so as people become stationary, then their smaller groups become larger, you know, city states, and they begin to have, you know, neighboring villages, and things become more concentrated. The origins and evolution of government continued. So the Athenians reorganized their city states as a direct democracy. When Pericles spoke of government being in the hands of the whole people, he meant in the hands of male citizens of Athens. Others, including women, slaves, and foreign born people living in Athens, were not allowed to participate in government affairs. For those citizens who did qualify, however, they participated on a scale that was unique in the ancient world. In 1509 BCE, the Roman people overthrew their monarchy and turned Rome into a republic. Over time, the Romans set up a new form of government and called it representative democracy to govern their republic. And so, one thing to note is that the idea of democracy is not very new. It was found in the ancient world. But this gives us two types of democracy. So, with the Athenians, direct democracy gave everyone a vote. And in their society, it was all males could vote. And so they all get a vote to decide and make decisions. But the Romans used a representative democracy where they elected senators. So they elected their representative to make their decisions for us. And so here in the US, we follow a representative democracy. We elect our senators, our House of Representatives, and they in Congress make those decisions, for us. And then if we don't like what they've done, we can choose someone else in the next election. The origins and evolution of government continued. In parts of Europe once ruled by the mighty Rome, the empire broke into tiny districts. After the empire was divided, each district was ruled by a duke. It often made sense for weak nobles to look for a nearby, more powerful neighbor for protection. This exchange this system of exchanging the use of land for military and other services became known as feudalism. Europe's parliaments developed from meetings of vassals summoned by a lord or a king. The 1300s saw the rise of absolute monarchies or governments headed by hereditary rulers who claimed unlimited powers. So we're starting to see kind of more sophisticated developments of power and sharing power. So with feudalism, a lord knows that he can't, work all of his land, so he parcels out the land in exchange for military service and loyalty. But they also know that they can all have a say. So while it does have a leader, has some elements of um, the leader needs to ask them for permission and gets their advice. Then we start to see a transition more to these absolute monarchies where you're going to have a king, and the king just makes the decision. The origin and evolution of government continued. By the 1700s, several European countries had become nation states headed by absolute monarchs. These all powerful rulers based their legitimacy on the divine rights of kings theory. The actions of despots or tyrants led to growing dissatisfaction with this form of government and triggered a series of world altering revolutions, first in Europe, then in the American colonies. The American Revolution led to the creation of the first modern constitutional democracy, a democratic government based on a written constitution. At first, the French Revolution seemed likely to produce another constitutional democracy. Instead, it took a radical turn and eventually collapsed into chaos. So people began to become dissatisfied with their kings, mostly because these kings, were not concerned with the people. And then people realizing that, hey, there's more of us than there is of them, and started these revolutions. Like with the American Revolution, we wanted to be independent. We didn't want the king to rule over us, and we were successful. The French Revolution, very similar. They overthrew the king. However, they really didn't have a plan for what they were going to do after their revolution. And so that led their country to collapse into chaos, and then creating a power vacuum that allowed for Napoleon to take charge. Okay, so this is the last slide for the notes. So some historians argued that Napoleon's approach to governing set the stage for the rise of totalitarianism in the 20th century. He wanted total control. He often had the French people spied upon just to see if there's anyone trying to overthrow him. But then his grasp of power eventually fell as well. So in its place, revolutionaries established the Soviet Union, which became the world's first state based on communism. A form of totalitarianism known as fascism first appeared in Italy during the 1920s, and then a third type of totalitarianism, Nazism, took root in the 20th century in Germany. Okay, so we're done with these notes. So remember, you have key terms. You can look up your key terms either in the glossary or in the link on the TCI tab. Your assignment today is going to be based on a timeline. So you probably will need to use your textbook to look up kind of specific events that the timeline refers to.